You're listening to 16 Artists, a conversation series with young creators finding their way in the world. Welcome to part 2 of my chat with filmmaker Jumai Yusuf and dance artist Javi Aranzales. I loved our conversation so much, I had to break it up into 2 parts. So in this half of the conversation, we cover communicating science through art, egocentricity in international development, and how to make ends meet as an artist just starting out. I hope you enjoy. Jumai, when you said Afrofuturism as a way to prove that Black people will exist in the future, art as evidence, almost, and then also talking about the value of having prompts so that you can imagine yourself, people can imagine themselves somewhere in some place or in some time. In that answer, there was this beautiful mix, I think, of the language of proving and the language of imagining. And I think so often in the American context, we're taught that these are separate, that science and evidence and empiricism is separate from art and imagination and ornamentation. I mean, in the US context, I think so often that's one of the ways people write off the arts and don't think arts education is important, is by saying, oh, it's not real, it's not fact, it's not. But, you know, we're seeing how much cultural change can affect society, it can affect politics, it can affect law. You have a background in studying neurobiology. So I'm curious about what your latest thinking is about the supposed sort of dichotomy between science and art.
Well, I mean, I've always been interested in that, I guess, debate over science versus art and actually trying to form a bridge in between them. I mean, one thing I did while I was at Harvard was science theater at Harvard College. Shout out to, I have no idea if this organization still exists, but that was an organization, I created, and like Sean Hardy and other theater people who studied neurobiology were all a part of it. And it was one way of trying to form this bridge. And something we did there was trying to take scientific issues and almost translating them to the public through art, through plays, through experimental theater. And I've actually been thinking about that a lot now with COVID and how we see the rise of people like Dr. Fauci almost as like celebrities. And it just, is a reminder about how important it is to communicate science to the public. And I think that's one example where you can't like separate science from things like art, because I mean, if you just are in your lab, like making your science happen, but then you can't actually like spread that to the world and you can't like talk about it with people, then it's almost like you didn't complete your job. You know what I mean? And I just think art in all of its different forms is one way of bridging the gap between people who are like researching and making discoveries and then the public who can benefit from that. I guess I'm a left and right brain person in that sense too. And I think that's honestly helped me because I can, go off into my head and like think up all these like cool worlds and stories, but then I still have that like producer mind that kind of brings me back down to reality and thinks about like, okay, how are we actually going to accomplish this? Right. So I think having that almost that like empirical side has helped me as an artist and given myself the freedom to be creative and imaginative while also like actually making it happen, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does make sense. And while we're talking about kind of empiricism and bridging these sorts of dualities, Javi, I want to ask you about this spectrum that you've worked on between sort of the corporate tech company and then being on the ground and doing dance education for refugees in Rwanda and creating content and working directly with communities. I'm curious about What to you makes a good relationship between an institution and a community? Because I feel like it's often very awkward, right? You're in kind of a space that some call development or community development and
Mm,
social development. And that's a very kind of fraught term, right? I think it's there are lots of debates around development, and a question that comes up a lot is like, what is that power dynamic when an institution comes from outside of Kenya or outside of Africa, comes in, works with local community, and tells them what to do without like listening to locals? There's this
mhm.
tension between institutions, whether that's like socially responsible corporations or international, um, governing bodies, with local communities. So as someone who's,
Mm.
walked this path between them, what do you think is a model that works well?
As maybe simple as this is going to sound, is respect. Because if it's all about having the respect to look at the local context, create with the local context, not only in mind, but part of the creation. Like, you can't just say, oh, I'm going to go to Colombia and set up this NGO. Like, you have to like be very in touch with the local context. And even that, the local people should even be part of the creation. But then even on a personal level, it's out of respect for local culture, like trying to engage with the language. I think for me, language is such an important part of it. That's the thing. In Kenya, English is, you can get away with it in Nairobi. And in many other countries in Africa, like in Colombia, you go and there's no English or very little English. But here you can get away with it, but it still makes a difference if you're trying to connect on that level. So I think it's just a matter of realizing, first of all, nobody needs to be saved, first of all. Second of all, nobody needs to be saved. Third of all, third of all, if somebody does need to be saved, it's not going to be you. It's not going to be me. It's going to be somebody on a local level. And so just once you understand that, like, you can have the best intentions, like, oh, something about this community speaks to me and it's foreign to me. But understanding that there are things that you have to do in order for your intentions to be in the right place. Because it's very easy to come in and that's actually one thing that I really like saw myself playing with was, so one of my greatest mentors is Doris Summer. Doris Summer at Harvard, she's pioneering this cultural agents movement and arts for social change. That was really inspiring to me. So the first time I ever came to Africa was to Uganda. And I was working with Doris Summer on a project in Uganda. And I remember having that kind of foreigner mindset where I'm seeing, okay, this road, people are just crossing like this and there's no crosswalk. Maybe we need to put a crosswalk here. It's very natural for you to be in an outside, like have this outside mentality. And then also, this is everything that you've been taught in school. School is teaching you find problems, come up with solutions, put in a crosswalk, put a clown at the crosswalk to like educate the citizens. and so natural for us to be conditioned, not in like I am white and I'm coming into this community, but even just from our education, we are conditioned to think in certain ways, especially in problem solution. Oh, this taxi park where all these buses are is very dark in Kampala. Let's put a street lamp. Like, literally.
It's also like looking at a situation and being like, oh, what this situation needs is me. It needs my idea. That's what it's missing.
Thank you. And because like, as somebody who was in the development space in college and you read texts, you're introduced to guest lecturers where that's the narrative. The narrative is, look what I did. Look what I founded. Look at the problem that I solved, which I'm now so far removed from the whole development space, and which I love because I think it's a very risky and dangerous mindset to think in that way. And it's so natural because you're just exposed to that. You're like, oh my God, he went to Bain and he did consulting and then he started an NGO that builds schools in El Salvador. You're like, whoa, I want to do that. Like, that's amazing. But it's understanding like that's amazing to do, but you have to really have all these different things in check for that to be just sustainable, first of all, and then also just like coming from the right place.
I think to try to connect some of these dots here, you talked about the way that you lead with connection, respect being very important, and in some ways it's kind of like letting go of the ego a little bit and just being humble and learning when you go to someplace new, letting go of that. It's not about, yeah, it's not about you, or it's not about me. It's about the people. It's about this place. Like letting go of individuality. I think part of this really is wrapped up in a culture of individuality.
Mm.
Of like, what's my narrative that I'm gonna draw? Like, what am I gonna offer to the world? What is my career? And so why are we talking about this guy this guy who doesn't exist, but this guy who went to Bain and then started an NGO, and wow, look how amazing he is and how much I want to be like him. Why are we talking about him? Why aren't we talking about the crisis that he is playing into, and talking about it from that situational perspective or that communal perspective? So, letting go of the age of individuality and embracing the age of multiplicity.
Tagline.
Yes.
No, I mean, everything you're saying, it makes so much sense, and it's really inspiring. I want to learn more about your relationship with your art form, though, or one of your art forms, dance. So you've been dancing in so many different contexts in the last 5 years. So what have these years taught you about dance that you didn't know before?
Okay, so dance was always very important for me because I coin it as, and my Harvard admissions officer will will attest to this, that it was what allowed, oh God, I haven't said this in so long. It is what allowed me to kind of take control of the pen to my own story, because it was this ballet conservatory in Miami. They really did impact me, like putting this kid whose parents fled a country because of all these things that were happening. You grew up in a trailer park, that was where my family grew up. And now you put them in, like you give them the lead role of Nutcracker Prince. And they're not even a good dancer, by the way. They're not even good. They're not even a good dance. Like they've been dancing for literally at this point 3 months. But you still see something and you're like, we're gonna put this boy as the Nutcracker Prince. And his Clara, like his princess, is going to be this African-American girl from Miami. And so that right there is changing so much of like my self-worth. Like I now belong in the spotlight. Like no matter where I come from and what my parents have been through, and my dad selling roses at stoplights and my mom washing dishes at restaurants, like now all of that, like I am in the spotlight. It's this idea of dance can do that. Art can do that for really anybody, but especially kids in these conditions. That was my mentality all throughout college, was art as social change, dance as social change. And so that's what I did in Nairobi. In Rwanda, I was amazing program, like worked with the United Nations to teach dance to youth from 6 of the 6 refugee camps in Rwanda. That was amazing because it's, again, at that point, I had already learned Swahili to like a kind of okay place. And so I think for me, that's what got my foot in the door, because it wasn't like, oh, we're looking for another dancer. It was like, no, you are connected to the local context in a way that will make you relatable to these kids who are coming from Burundi or from Congo. And where Swahili is something that they speak. So again, it was along the same lines of dance for social change, dance to tell your story of fleeing, of like telling your story of becoming something bigger than you thought you could. But now that's a 180-degree turn, because I think of dance in a very different way now, which is dance as a way to connect with people, not in a social change kind of mindset. We're just using it as a bridge to connect.
Sometimes it's just that simple. Mm-hmm. It's like the most basic way that we change socially is by connecting with people.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's really beautiful. I also think, there's this beautiful sort of dialectic between what you're saying of like, I don't know, maybe I'm the one that's splitting everything into dualities, but, your perspective that you have on the way in which the development mentality can be a little bit too self-centered or individually minded, but also showing the beauty of how dance enabled you to put yourself in the spotlight and kind of shine as an individual and be the author to your own story. So there are sort of beautiful kind of pros and cons that you have to balance. And I feel like it's this process. To me, it's resonating with this process I'm going through of always learning and unlearning. And it's almost a cyclical process of growth rather than I learned this and then I learned that and I learned that and I accumulated all the lessons. It's more like, okay, I learned this and I unlearned this and then I relearned this and then, conversion and reversion.
Yeah,
So,
especially coming out of a place like Harvard, especially where audience here might be either you're an undergrad or you've graduated. Like, there's so many things that I feel so far removed from. Where Harvard for me was it just changed everything for me. It expanded my worldview in ways that I could never imagined. But it's also interesting to see this cycle of my mentality was very different. Like, I used to literally go walk around Kampala, Uganda, looking for issues because I was like, I want to like make something happen. Okay, like, am I gonna be like known for a crosswalk or like a street lamp? Like,
yeah.
it's that, and then now you're seeing in very much like that's so much we're taught, like the guest lectures, the narratives that we have the privilege to have access to. But it's just interesting, like now when you get out into the real world and you're able to really craft your own, because it's true, like any institution can really make you think in a certain way, where then 5 years out, you really think, I used to think in such different ways than I do now. And even just little small things, like even saying you went to Harvard has now in my circles become practically irrelevant. When I used to be at Microsoft, like you're surrounded by that mentality of what does your resume look like? Where did you go to school? Are you doing an MBA? What was your undergrad? And it's beautiful knowing that got us to where we are, but then also understanding that there's so much life and world outside of those structures of like name dropping or like I went to Harvard. Like I can go months without thinking about going to Harvard or even mentioning I went to Harvard. So I think it's beautiful for anybody listening, like kind of exactly what you're saying, like your mentality can be somewhere. And then you can, in a couple years, months, you can have a whole different mentality, which that's really beautiful.
The world is so much more vast sometimes than we realize.
I mean, when I first came out to like LA, I think somebody somewhere said that like, don't tell people you went to Harvard. Like they'll have like the wrong impression of you. Like, I don't know, maybe they think like you're some spoiled person who like doesn't want to put the work in. Clearly that person had a vendetta. I don't know. But I remember that was something that kind of, I guess, stuck to me. And I realized by going into an artistic field, in my opinion, it feels like that Harvard background isn't necessarily as important, especially back in the days when we didn't even have like a theater degree. Like, you know what I mean? So it was more like, okay, but what films have you made or what scripts have you written or like how have you proven yourself as an artist as opposed to what school did you go to in undergrad, you know?
I completely agree. We buy into this idea that having a Harvard degree will set us for life. But if you're going into the arts, it's this rude awakening early on where you realize no one cares about that. And you know what? That's good because also most people don't care about that in the world. So we're realizing this just earlier than I think maybe some of our other classmates.
Yes, honestly.
And it's more just about living and putting the work in and making connections with people. It's not a ladder that's laid out for you. You have to figure it out as you go, as most people in the world.
The reality is like, who are you keeping in touch with? Like, it's a few people from college. Like, we're not impressing anybody like on social media. Like, this is now your life and you're living it for you. And I think that's the beautiful thing is like, what do you want your life to look like? And it doesn't have to be like the brochure kind of career ladder that is just so widely advertised. If there's something you keep thinking about, you might as well want to try that. There's a reason you keep thinking about it. And going to Microsoft gave me a huge safety net, especially financial, where I was able to then explore and come here and be able to support myself even when I didn't have a job because of that 1 year. And so nobody's saying like, don't go into corporate or don't go into tech, because if you have an interest, that can set you up so nicely to explore in the next year or later on in your life.
That's really nice. I mean, I would have loved to have some financial, stability before I went to grad school. I'm like, dang, like you should have told me this. But I guess I do want to say that I did the opposite, where I didn't go into corporate or tech or really had a full-time job. And I really tried to go the artist route. And like right when I graduated, I made 2 short films that I used for applying to graduate school. And now I'm at USC School of Cinematic Arts and I'm about to graduate. So that's a 3-year program that I'm finishing up now. And like as soon as Ramadan is over, I'm graduating. It's crazy. But yeah, so I did not have like a nice, stable job. I was kind of freelancing and doing really weird things. Like I even worked at a local movie theater. And my parents definitely questioned why I went to Harvard and then worked at a movie theater, but it's fine. So that is also, that is also a way to go about things. Like you are also young right after you graduate, and hopefully you have, a couple of less responsibilities so you can kind of work work the freelance gig for a little bit, or just go to graduate school and then like not worry about your finances because you're just getting loans. So that's also definitely a path.
If you were to give yourself one piece of advice 5 years ago, right after graduation, what would it be?
I guess maybe I would just tell myself not to be afraid of like failure and rejection, because that will happen to you. Like I feel like honestly, I've always been so, hard headed to the fact that I don't think I would do anything differently. Like I kind of came out and started pursuing what I wanted to do. But I definitely maybe moved with a little bit more like fear, in the sense that, oh, like I don't want to get rejected from this, or you know what I mean? And when I applied to film schools, I didn't get in the first round of applications. So that was like a rude awakening, but also really nice too, because when you go to Harvard, sometimes it's like, oh, your life is just set. Like you're always going to get into everything you do. So it was nice to get that, like, oh, actually, you're not perfect and like you have room to grow. And maybe I would just tell myself, that's okay, like you're going to get knocked down like on your path, and that's just part of life.
It's beautiful advice. Thank you.
I would tell myself, keep prioritizing relationships, keep humanity at the core. Like, no matter where you are, no matter what you're doing, like, are you calling your parents? Are you having those relationships? I had a conference in London, and on the way to the conference, one of my friends in Vancouver. So I like booked this flight through Vancouver with like a layover so I could see her. I got in a lot of trouble from my management stopping in Vancouver for like a weekend on the, like when I should have been working in London. Those are the things that we need to prioritize ourselves and our relationships, of course, in smart ways, but always do that thing that is calling you that far, because then you're not, like, you don't look back and you're like, oh, I wish I would have like gone on that trip. Like, no, you did the trip.
I'm going to sound like such a reunion committee nerd, but it's like Steven Spielberg in his graduation commencement speech for us said, don't just listen to the voice telling you what you should do. Listen to the whisper telling you what you could do.
Oh, whisper.
Something like that. I might.
I'm gonna assume you remembered that over the past 5 years.
Yes, it did. It really did. It stayed with me. You can learn more about Jumai Yusuf and Javi Aranzales at 16artists.com. Thank you to the Office for the Arts at Harvard and the Harvard Alumni Association for supporting this podcast. I'd love to hear any reactions you have to this podcast, so feel free to get in touch with me directly on Instagram, Twitter, or LinkedIn at REYLXN. My name is Raylan Yant. Thanks for listening to 16 Artists.